very warm welcome. Especially warm welcome if you've just finished the 12-week introductory course and this is your first night at Sangha Night. Very warm welcome to you. So, for those people who are new to these evenings, these Tuesday evenings, I need to do quite a lot of explaining about our theme and where we're at with it at the moment, so that you have some sense of what's going on in these classes. You don't just feel being dropped into the middle of something with no explanation. So, first of all, I'm going to say something extremely unhelpful, which is that our theme for these evenings since last autumn has been the Refuge Tree of the Triratna Buddhist Order. And you are absolutely none the wiser. Absolutely none the wiser. These things called refuge trees, that is actually it over there, that is an image of the refuge tree. These things called refuge trees, they're quite common in traditional Buddhist schools. So, for example, in Tibetan Buddhism, every school and sub-school and sub-sub-school will have its own refuge tree, showing how the teachings are supposed to have passed down from the Buddha to that particular time and place, a long way away and a long space in time. So there would be a tree, and at the bottom of that tree there would be the most important lamas and teachers of that tradition in the recent past, nearest to the viewer in the present. And then going back further in time, you'd be going further up the tree, you'd have the people who were really instrumental in the evolution of that particular style of practice, and perhaps the people who founded that particular style of practice. And then going back even further in time, typically the traditional Tibetan ones would start to get quite mythic, and they'd sort of be about how that particular teaching was passed down from Shakyamuni, from the Buddha, historical Buddha. They don't really stack up usually, because there's usually far too few links for the thousands of years involved, but in a way that doesn't matter. For the people who practice in those schools, these refuge trees represent the way Buddhism has, the way the particular style of Buddhism they practice has reached down through time and space to them, all the way from northern India, all the way from 2,500 years ago perhaps to them now in that particular place. So how that particular style of Buddhism, that particular approach, an approach that they can practice there and then, got to them. It shows the way that something supremely valuable miraculously got to me. We heard about the Dharma in a form that they could practice. So in the Triratna Buddhist community, the Triratna Buddhist Order, we've also got a refuge tree, hooray, which our founder, Sangha Night, I don't know what you'd say, devised. Sorry? He grew it. He planted the seed and watered it and grew it. Although in many ways it's very different from the traditional refuge tree. So a lot of what I'm going to say now, I'm afraid if you've been coming to these classes for a while, you'll have heard it before. Okay. That doesn't matter. Non-repetition is the canker of the spiritual life. That's the same. So you get plenty of repetition. So yeah, our refuge tree has the Buddha firmly at the centre, as you can see from that image, reflecting the fact that the original teachings of the Buddha are what's fundamental in our style of practice, really sort of the basis of our style of practice. But as well as basing our approach on the fundamental teachings of the Buddha, we also draw our inspiration from the whole Buddhist tradition. And some of our practices we draw from the whole range of the Buddhist tradition. If there's a valid approach to practicing the Dharma that's going to be useful here and now, whether it be in Tibet or China or Japan or Korea, we'll look at it. We may bring it in. So our refuge tree also shows a range of important teachers and practitioners from all over the world. as I say, from ancient India, but also from Tibet, from China, from Japan. They're the sort of great masters of the Buddhist tradition, and particularly the people who helped the Dharma to evolve to meet a new situation or to work in a new culture, something like that. So people we can learn from in this new situation as the Dharma evolves into this new situation and this new culture. And as with the traditional refuge trees, at the bottom of the refuge tree, our refuge tree shows the most recent teachers from whom the teaching has come down to us. So at the bottom of our refuge tree we have Sangha Night, surrounded by his teachers from the Tibetan tradition, from the Sri Lankan Theravadan tradition, and from the Chinese tradition. So for us, as with the traditional refuge trees, the refuge tree is a symbol of the Buddhist tradition in the form in which it has reached us miraculously in Sheffield. I don't suppose the Buddha had ever heard of Sheffield. It didn't exist. I don't suppose he's ever heard of Britain or Europe. In a form that it's reached us, and in a form that we can practice in this particular situation in which we find ourselves. So since last autumn, that's what we've been doing. We've been using this refuge tree as the framework to help us explore the Dharma, to explore how we can practice the Dharma here and now. So we haven't been looking at the various figures on the refuge tree for their sort of historical or academic interest. We've been looking at using them and their teachings and their lives as ways of looking at how we practice in our lives. So that's what we've been doing. That's a little bit about our theme, and that's what that thing is doing there. And you'll grow more familiar with it as we go on. But just to complicate matters, you've joined us just as we start to look at a part of the refuge tree. If you're new to this class, you've joined us just as we start to look at a part of the refuge tree that isn't about human teachers or practitioners at all. Okay? So there are all these human figures. There are a lot of human figures on the refuge tree, people who actually existed, the great masters of the tradition going back in time. And some of them might have lived a long way away in very alien cultures, very different cultures. So they might seem quite strange and exotic. But at least they were people. The figures we're going to explore over the next 5 weeks aren't people at all. They're purely archetypal, with bodies of coloured light rather than bodies of flesh and blood. They exist in the depths of our minds. So we might meet them in deep meditation, in visionary experience, or mainly in dreams, maybe in dreams, but we won't meet them on the bus or at Morrison's. So what we're going to look at over the next month or so is a set of archetypal mythic Buddhas who appear on our refuge tree, right at the very top. You probably can't quite make them out. Called the Mandala of the 5 Buddhas, or the Mandala of the 5 Jinnas. Jinnas means conquerors, so the Mandala of the 5 Buddhas. So you probably know that a mandala is a sort of geometric pattern. And in Buddhism, a mandala usually has a central figure and then other figures around it which are aspects of that figure. So each part of a mandala is a manifestation, an aspect of whatever is at the centre. So a mandala is a spatial diagram that allows us to get a feel for the different aspects of something. There's something in the middle, and then there's different aspects of it represented. So a mandala allows us to get a feel for the different aspects of something. And in the case of the mandala of the 5 Buddhas, it's a spatial diagram that helps us to get a feel for some of the main aspects of enlightenment, for some of the main aspects of Buddhahood. So there are 4 figures around the edge of this mandala, each one representing a particular aspect of enlightenment and a particular approach to enlightenment. And then there's a central figure representing Buddhahood itself, enlightenment itself, the enlightened mind. So it's a bit like, the mandala of the 5 Buddhas, a bit like one of those exploded diagrams of a car engine that you might have had if you ever bought a car maintenance manual or something. You think, oh, there it is. All the bits are out there, and there it is. So it shows you all the bits of enlightenment, a diagram of the bits of enlightenment in an exploded way. Or another way of looking at it that's a bit more traditional is it's like the way white light is split up by a prism. So the central figure in the mandala is composed of white light, and the figures around it are composed of coloured light. And of course, white light, when you shine it through a prism, splits into its component wavelengths, which may look very different from each other, but they're all part of the white light. So the bits around the edges of the mandala, the aspects of enlightenment that are symbolised around the edge of the mandala, may look very different from each other, but they're all components of enlightenment, of the white light of the central figure. And these are figures that traditionally people would meditate on to get a feel for that aspect of enlightenment, to wake up that aspect of enlightenment in themselves, to get closer to their potential for that aspect of enlightenment, or would imaginatively connect with. Okay, that introduces a whole new idea, the idea of meditating on a Buddha image. We're used to meditating perhaps on metta, or meditating on the breath to calm and focus the mind. But what on earth is the point of meditating on a Buddha image, you might ask yourself. How does that help us to develop? But it's a practice that goes right back to the time of the Buddha. So I need to say a bit more about that as a way of sort of explaining why we should bother looking at the mandala. So I was just saying, why bother? Why bother looking at the mandala? What's this about different coloured Buddhas? Why don't we got the teachings, why don't we just look at the teachings and do these very straightforward practices? Practice metta, practice the various precepts, meditate on coloured Buddhas? How did that evolve? What's that about? How does that help us? What's that got to do with our spiritual lives? So to open up maybe what that's got to do with our spiritual lives, maybe we need to go back and look at how it evolved, how it helped people in the past with their spiritual lives. So going back in the past, we go right back to the time of the Buddha. At the time of the Buddha, a lot of his closest disciples spent a lot of time in the Buddha's presence. So we can imagine that if we lived in the Buddha's presence, if we lived in the presence of a completely enlightened human being, the most sort of noble, wise, empathic, uplifted being we can imagine, that would have an effect on the way we lived our lives. So, in a sense, we would tend to see ourselves through their eyes. If we lived with them, we'd see ourselves through their eyes. So we'd see ourselves through the eyes of a higher being, which also reflects something in our being. So if we felt tempted to get into a bit of gossiping or backbiting, and the Buddha was around, or if we felt really sorry for ourselves about some trivial disappointment and wanted to have a real moan and get into ours, we'd see ourselves from that higher perspective, and we sort of think, oh God, it's a childish Vadanya, whatever. We'd see ourselves from that highest perspective, and that would stop us in our tracks. His presence would wake up our own ethical sense, if you like, to put it that way, our own sense of what's positive and worthy in us. And if we went against that, we'd feel a sense of healthy shame. We'd feel ashamed of ourselves. We'd feel ashamed of ourselves because we were letting ourselves down. So we would act differently. So on the negative side, we'd be ashamed of acting in a way that wasn't worthy. And on the other hand, we'd be inspired. We'd have in front of us an example of what is possible for a human being to be, what's possible for us to be. And that would inspire us. We'd be inspired to speak and to act in a way from what is best in us. So, in both those ways, if we lived in the Buddha's presence, it would have a profound effect on us. But I think also in another way it would have a profound effect on us, because the Buddha, if we were in the Buddha's presence, enlightenment would always be being communicated to us. Something about the nature of enlightenment would be communicated by the Buddha's very presence, something that actually goes beyond words. So I came across somewhere, which I've forgotten, can't quote you the reference, but it was a book by a psychologist about human communication. And in this book, this psychologist said that 6% of what gets communicated when two human beings discuss something is communicated through words. The other 94% is communicated through facial expression, body language, tone of voice, pace of voice, the eyes, to all sorts of signals that we pick up intuitively and really mean something to us, but we're not really conscious of. We're sort of picking them up at an unconscious level. Okay, I'm a bit dubious about the figure of 6%. Okay. One of my favourite statistics is that 50% of statistics are made up on the spot. I have no idea what quantitative techniques they used to come up with 6% as the amount of human communication that goes on through words, but in a way that doesn't matter. The general principle is true, that only a small amount of what we communicate is communicated through words. You can imagine somebody saying exactly the same thing in words and saying it in completely different ways, like, "That was a really good talk you gave, Vadanya." That was a really good talk you gave, Vadanya. You can communicate exactly the opposite thing using the same words. If you don't make contact with someone's eyes while you say something, it says something, etc., etc., etc. So only a small amount of what we communicate is communicated through words. And what the Buddha communicated was enlightenment. He communicated that through his very being. And so we might think, well, why do we need to think about the Buddha? We've got the Dharma. We've got what he taught. But what he taught in words is the 6%. The other 94%, the people who were in his presence had, but we know that the other 94% came through the Buddha's presence. And it's picked up in ways that aren't quite so logical and easily explained and rational. And at the Buddha's time, his followers were lucky enough to be with the Buddha, got a lot of that. They got the 94%. Enlightenment's right there, being communicated to them. But even in the time of the Buddha, plenty of his followers couldn't be with him all the time. And for them, the way they would try to get the missing 94% would be by calling the Buddha to mind in meditation, by imaginatively calling the Buddha to mind and imagining themselves in the Buddha's presence. In their mind's eye, enlightenment would be right there in front of them. I mean, so they'd have the advantage that they actually met the Buddha, so they could remember, but also they were using their imagination to call the Buddha back into their mind, so that it had the effect of the same effect as being in his actual presence. And there's a very famous sutta about this guy called Pinggya, who's an old man, where the Buddha tells Pinggya, doing that very practice, calling the Buddha to mind and focusing on that, on what you pick up from that, is going to get you enlightened, Pinggya. It's going to get you enlightened. So even at the Buddha's time, this was a practice that the Buddha recommended to move people to enlightenment. And as you can imagine, after his death, it became even more important. Even with people who'd never met the Buddha, it seemed to work. it seemed to work. It was a really important practice. And I think it works because when we imagine something, if we do it with a focused enough mind, if we do it deeply enough, then we evoke whatever quality we imagine in our own mind. We awaken our potential for that quality. If you imagine being angry, if you imagine situations that were likely to make you angry, you'll get angry. I once came across a case of a man who was pathologically jealous of his wife. He was pathologically jealous of his wife. And every time he saw his wife with another man, he would fly into a rage. And it transpired, well, I think he was in some sort of psychoanalysis, it transpired that what happened in his mind was whenever he saw his wife in the presence of another man, talking to another man, he imagined them in bed together. And then he felt really jealous. So then he was in a jealous rage. And all he had to do was stop doing that step. And lo and behold, so what we imagine, we experience. What we imagine, we experience. And because we've got the seeds of enlightenment in us, when we imagine enlightenment, we awaken those seeds. We put ourselves in touch with something that we're not normally conscious of. We get a taste of something. Our potential for enlightenment is woken up when we imagine enlightenment, when we imagine an enlightened being, when we imagine the Buddha. Something in us resonates with it and is woken up. At quite a deep level, at a level that's deeper than words, enlightenment is not going to be communicated by words. If we expect it to be there, clear as daylight on a page, it ain't going to be. We're going to pick it up much more through symbol, through things that speak to us intuitively. We're going to get a taste of it, a sense of it. So people have always done that in the Buddhist tradition, imagining enlightenment. And often it's been imagining the Buddha, imagining ourselves in the presence of the Buddha. The trouble with imagining the Buddha as a practice is that enlightenment, the whole of enlightenment, is a very multifaceted thing. There's wisdom, there's clarity of vision, there's compassion, there's empathy for others, there's creativity, there's energy, there's all sorts of things that are aspects of enlightenment. And it's a bit much to try and sort of cram all of that into one symbol and really get a sense of it. So it's much easier to focus on one simpler aspect of enlightenment at a time. We might be focusing on cultivating compassion, cultivating empathy, or cultivating serenity and equanimity, or cultivating energy and creativity. And it might be much clear-sightedness. It might be much easier to focus on that and think, well, okay, I need to do the others, but I'll do them not right now. I can't do it all at once. So it's much easier to cultivate one of those qualities, to develop one quality and move on to another rather than doing them all at once. So as the Buddhist tradition developed, a lot of archetypal figures developed who embody just part of what it is to be enlightened, because they're easier to access, they're easier to imagine. And meditating on those figures, or even just imagining those figures, thinking about those figures, connecting with them in our imagination can be a powerful way of giving us a sense of that quality, waking up that quality in us. A much more powerful way than abstract ideas. So if we want to get a sense of what it might be like to be a truly compassionate human being, much easier to do that by imagining a compassionate human being than it is by thinking about compassion in the abstract in some way. So figures developed who represent aspects of enlightenment. And that seems to be how this mandala of the 5 jhanas developed. We've got 5 figures, or 4 figures, and one central one, who represent aspects of enlightenment. So, in the mandala of the 5 Buddhas, which in classic, high-tech manner we haven't got a picture of, you have to imagine it. In the mandala of the 5 Buddhas, what you've got is a central figure, and then another figure in each of the 4 cardinal directions. And each of the Buddhas in the 4 cardinal directions it represents a part of enlightenment, an aspect of enlightenment. And they're powerful symbols. They're powerful symbols. And if we engage our imagination with them, we can get a much richer sense of the aspects of enlightenment, of what enlightenment consists of, than we can by just thinking in terms of words and abstract concepts. So symbols can be a much better way of getting that sense of enlightenment than abstract ideas. One of the problems with abstract ideas and expressed in words is we can think we understand it. We don't understand enlightenment. It's beyond us. So it needs to be communicated by something that we can't quite grasp, that sort of hits us at a deeper level, sneaks in around the back of the intellect and gives us a sense of it. Yeah, these are very, very powerful figures, which will become more obvious as we go along. They're very powerful symbols, which use a whole range of imagery and symbolism to communicate something to us, to connect us with something that perhaps we can't fully understand, but we can get a taste of, an intuition of. Enlightenment's much more likely to be communicated through symbols or music or poetry or myth than through abstract concepts. The meaning is too deep for words. And the symbolism in the five Buddhas is very, very rich. So it uses colours, it uses gestures, it uses different animals, it uses objects, different objects, it uses different times of day, all sorts of things to communicate, to give us a taste of what different aspects of enlightenment might be. And that's what we're going to be exploring over the next 4 weeks after tonight. What I'm going to do tonight is tell you a little bit, finally, about what the mandala might actually look like. Hooray, we got there. What's on it? So at the centre of the five Buddha mandala, we have a white, an enormous, cosmic Buddha made of white light called Varochana. Varochana means illuminator. In some traditions in Japan, I think is sometimes translated as Great Sun Buddha. So he sits at the centre of the mandala like the sun sits at the centre of the solar system. He lights up the whole mandala. It's his light, his white light that lights up the whole mandala and is split into different colours, like the sun lights up the solar system. He is the enlightened mind in its completeness, if you like. All the other figures in the mandala are aspects of him. So I'll say more about Varochana at the end of this talk, but I'd like you to just have in mind that there's this sun-like figure right at the centre of the mandala. But for a while, I'd just like to talk about the figures around the edges. So traditionally, mandalas are seen a bit like, they're often represented as sort of magical worlds that you can enter. Like these wonderful cities you see in medieval paintings, and you're not interested in the figures in the foreground. Often in medieval paintings, I can't be bothered with the figures in the foreground, but there's this city in the background. I really want to go there. They look so wonderful. They've got walls around them and towers and things. Or like a secret garden, one of those secret gardens, a walled garden. Walled gardens, doors into walled gardens always seem to me like doors into magic realms. So a mandala is seen a bit like a magic realm, like a walled garden or a walled city. We need to go through one of those mysterious and fascinating doors to get into it. And the traditional entrance to the five Buddha mandala is from the east, the direction of the setting sun. So we're going to follow the sun round through the day. So we walk through this door in the east. It's dawn. And the first thing we see is this huge, awesome, beautiful image of a Buddha whose body is made of pure, radiant blue light. He's dressed in royal robes and he's wearing jewels that sparkle with a brilliant, clear, bluish-white light. The light of a diamond, the clear light of a diamond. So this is the Buddha Akshobhya in the East. The Buddha Akshobhya, whose name means unshakable, immovable, imperturbable. And as I said, he's associated with the early dawn. So I like to imagine his blue, the blue of his body, as being like the clear blue of the sky just before dawn. Hasn't it got this one, not when I'm up that time very often, but hasn't it got this beautiful clear blue colour? And he holds his left hand in his lap, and his right hand is reaching down to touch the earth in a gesture, what's called the earth-touching mudra, which you'll see on quite a lot of Buddha images. This is the gesture, of calling the earth to witness, it's called. It sort of expresses solidarity with the earth, rootedness, solidity, groundedness. So this Buddha of clear blue light, he's the aspect of enlightenment that is completely above ordinary worldly worries and cares and anxieties. He's completely free. He is a mind that is completely unshakable. Ordinary wants and fears cannot shake him. They can't move him. He's quite beyond them. And that's expressed by his name, immovable, unshakable, imperturbable. It's also expressed by his mudra, by his gesture, the gesture of touching the earth, solidly grounded, not being pushed. It's expressed by his animal, an elephant. Don't push elephants around very easily. They're solid. And it's expressed by his colour and his time of day. So there's something cool and above it about Akshobhya. Dawn is a cool time of day, when the air is often crystal clear. And blue is a cool colour, the colour of clear water, the clear blue sky. And the sky is often a symbol of freedom in Buddhism, freedom from the usual sort of rubbish that goes on in our mind. It's a symbol for the clarity of the enlightened mind. So, for example, in meditation, we're encouraged to think of our mind as like a clear blue sky, that maybe clouds come, but then they go, without leaving any trace whatsoever. So for the enlightened mind, events, thoughts come and go, but they don't have to leave any stain on the clear clarity of the mind. So Akshobhya's blue colour expresses that unstainable freedom, and also the fact that he's serenely above the sorts of worries and anxieties that we get ourselves into a pickle about. Like the sky above the earth. With Akshobhya, we're looking down. It's as though we're up in a cool blue stratosphere, looking down on the curve of the earth. Normal events are seen from a completely different perspective, a much bigger perspective. We see our own concerns as much less important, and we have a much broader picture, a much wider perspective. We see further and better and clearer. That's what Akshobhya is about. So he's very connected with clarity, and it's this clarity that makes him immovable. He doesn't sweat the small stuff, and he knows that most of it, pretty much all of it's small stuff. And there's something almost fierce about his clarity. And Akshobhya is particularly associated with transforming ill will. So each of the Buddhas around the edge of the mandala has a particular poison, a particular negative mental state that they're associated with transforming, and a particular wisdom that they transform it into. So Akshobhya, the nature of Akshobhya, he turns ill will into the energy that destroys delusions. He turns it into a sort of fierce clarity that sees through everything. So his wisdom, the wisdom that he brings on, is called the mirror-like wisdom. It sees everything just as it is. Absolute clarity. So he's slightly the sort of patron Buddha of the slightly ill-tempered, or the critical. The people who've got that sort of mind that goes, I can see the problem with that straight away. So, if we move round the mandala from Akshobhya in a clockwise direction, following the direction of the sun, we move from the domain of the unshakable Akshobhya into the world of a very, very different Buddha. So this figure is huge and beautiful like Akshobhya, but whereas Akshobhya was a bit cool and blue, this next figure has all the warmth of the southern sun. And this is Ratna Sambhava. Ratna Sambhava, whose name means born from a jewel, and jewels are his symbol. And Ratna Sambhava, yeah, he's the Buddha of the south, and the Buddha of the noon, the Buddha of full summer sunlight. It'd be nice to have some. The Buddha of the golden Buddha of the full summer sun. His body is made of radiant yellow golden light, the colour of sunshine, the southern sunshine. And again, he's dressed in royal silk robes, and he's got a jewel crown, and he wears jewel ornaments. And his jewels are really rich and splendid colours. They're his special symbol. And his right hand holds a fabulous scintillating jewel in his lap. And his left hand is palm outwards in a gesture of giving, a gesture of generosity, supreme generosity. I might have got all my lefts and rights mixed up, but you can check this in the book. Is that right? Yeah, it's right. Okay, good. So Ratna Sambhava symbolises the overflowing, warm, inner beauty and richness of the enlightened mind. He's warm and rich like the sun, rich like gold, and beautiful like a jewel. And the natural expression of this inner richness and beauty and fertility is to overflow, is to pour beauty out onto everything around him, to pour generosity onto everything around him. He's supremely generous, supremely generative. Not because he's in any way denying himself, but from this sense of, that's how he expresses himself. He's totally free from any sense of poverty mentality. He's got a riches mentality. And it's not that he's just giving material things, it's more that his richness just sort of pours out into the world as beauty, etc., etc., so that anybody lucky enough to be around him is warmed and enriched by him. And Ratna Sambhava is particularly associated with the arts, among other things, because artistic creation is a way of pouring beauty into the world. It might also be associated with creating wealth and pouring that into positive things. Buddhist centres. Things that enrich the world. So Ratna Sambhava is particularly associated with transforming negative states associated with pride. He's the patron of the proud. So perhaps when we're proud, we're focused on our own richness, but in a wrong way. We're focused on our own giftedness, but in a wrong way. We're a bit puffed up. Instead of just naturally allowing our gifts to enrich the world in an unself-conscious way. Which is what Ratna Sambhava does. So Ratna Sambhava, that generosity, that generativeness, he's sort of the Buddha of the gifted. If Akshobhya is the Buddha of the slightly irritable, he's the Buddha of the gifted. And he transforms that sense of, well, I'm a bit gifted, into what's called the wisdom of sameness. So where we see that, well, actually, those gifts come from the universe, they're not mine. We see that people are that we're not something special. We're not special. We see, the wisdom of sameness, where we see the sameness of things. We see our connectedness with others, rather than putting ourselves on a pedestal above others. So moving around the mandala again, a bit further, following the sun, we move from the midday, the Buddha of the south, the Buddha of noon, to the realm of the Buddha of the sunset, the red Buddha Amitabha. So Amitabha's body, Amitabha means infinite light, okay, infinite light, and his body radiates the warm red light of the setting sun. He sits with his hands in the gesture of meditation, which is connected with maybe the peace of sunset. Peace descends on the word of sunset. But also with metta, maybe with the metta bhavana. And his name means infinite light, so he radiates the warm red light of metta. And compassion absolutely everywhere. Infinite light, it goes everywhere. It completely fills the universe with his warming red light. You could mythically imagine that it's that we're responding to when we do the metta bhavana. And that heart-warming red light can reach us anywhere, anytime, whatever we're doing. Filling us up with goodwill, kindness. So Amitabha, the Buddha of the West, the Buddha of sunset, is the Buddha of love and of all-pervading metta, and of the positive, warm emotions. Red, the colour of passion, the colour of warmth. But he's also the patron of those whose problem is desire, or craving, or lust. Red desire. So Amitabha transforms negative desire, that sort of sticky desire that wants things for us, or wants things in a neurotic way, transforms that. He transforms that into a sort of positive desire. He changes the heat of craving into emotional warmth, if you like, warmth for others. So it turns self-centered craving into what's called discriminating wisdom. And discriminating wisdom is seeing everything, seeing the uniqueness of everything, and loving everything for itself, for its unique qualities, loving every person for their unique qualities. That's called the discriminating wisdom. It's a discriminating wisdom because it sees the differentness of people, uniqueness of people, and loves that. So in a sense, that loving each thing for its uniqueness seems like the opposite of Ratnasambhava's wisdom of sameness. One is sort of seeing the sameness of all things, and one is seeing the uniqueness of all things. But, well, hey, the enlightened mind can encompass things that seem like opposites to us, but they're not. Okay, you rise to a higher level there. They're not opposites. So finally with the Mandala, if we leave the realm of Amitabha and keep moving clockwise with the sun, we pass from sunset into darkness, into night, into the complete blackness of midnight. And we enter the mysterious world of Amoga City. And Amoga City is seen against this black midnight sky. And against this black background, his body glows with a mysterious green light. Lurking in the darkness, there are some strange half-human figures who keep clashing symbols. A bit more about that later. So this nighttime scene might be a bit scary, but Amoga Vangsa's right hand is held in the gesture of fearlessness. Yes! We have our very own Amoga City practitioner here, and he's probably rubbed off. Amoga City's hand is held in a gesture of fearlessness. You'll see this on a lot of Buddha images. I think you'll see it on one right outside our door. That you'll see Ratnasambhava's giving gesture, and you'll see gesture of giving fearlessness. So Amoghasiddhi gives fearlessness. That's one of the things he does. He's saying, have no fear. And Amoghasiddhi's name means something like unstoppable success. Unstoppable success. He's the unstoppable action of the enlightened mind. And that, yeah, so he's unstoppable. He's the Buddha of unstoppable action, of fearlessness, of heroin. He represents the aspect of the enlightened mind that's completely beyond the sort of self-imposed anxieties and limitations we place upon ourselves, and what we can do. And Amoghasiddhi's poison is envy. He said he transmutes the negative state of envy into the wisdom of... sorry? All-accomplishing wisdom. Yeah, the all-accomplishing wisdom. It's getting towards the end of the talk. Envy. So envy comes from a sense that others have more than us, doesn't it? Envy comes from the sense that others have more than us, that they can do more than us. It breeds on the idea that we couldn't have or do those things ourselves. If we could, why would we envy? Why wouldn't we just do it? Envy comes from a can't-do mentality. And Amoghasiddhi completely transforms this into a can-do mentality. If you can do, why envy? So the mentality of the enlightened mind that has overcome self-imposed fears and limitations. And so he transforms envy into the all-accomplishing wisdom. That sense of, I can't quite do it, can't do. So I've mainly, there's a hugely rich symbolism associated with each of these Buddhas that I haven't really gone into, except to mention the elephant of Akshobhya. Every figure has got an animal, a thing, all sorts of things that bring up loads and loads of different associations. And all I've mentioned really is the elephant of Akshobhya. But I have to say something about Amoghasiddhi's animals, because they're such fun, because they are sort of half human, half bird, and they fly through the air, smashing these symbols together, and I just think that's such a lovely image. Crash, energy, success, bang. They're going to wake you up. It's very difficult to be asleep even at midnight with Amoghasiddhi and his shang birds. Shang. So they fly through the air, crashing symbols. So that is a bit about the 4 Buddhas around the edge of the Mandala and the 5 Buddhas. There's a lot more symbolism that I haven't explored that will be brought out in the coming weeks. They're very, very rich and complex symbols that really bring out. They've got loads of different ways of evoking our feeling and our intuitions about enlightenment. But they're all the ones we've looked at around the edges, they're all manifestations of the central Buddha, Vairocana, or the great sun Buddha, the illuminator. So Vairocana, the illuminator, he's like the sun at the centre of the solar system with his brilliant white light, which is refracted from all the other Buddhas and turned into all these various different colours. And his hands are in a gesture called turning the wheel of the Dharma, that I won't even try to imitate. But a wheel is his symbol. His symbol is the wheel. And obviously a wheel is something that's got a central hub that holds it all together, and a circumference. Like the solar system. Things that go round need a central hub. They need something to bring harmony to the whole system, to unite the whole system. And in a way, Vairocana turns the whole wheel of the Mandala. He's the hub around it, which all revolves. And his animal is the lion, which evokes kingship. It's the king of beasts. So, in a mythic sense, Vairocana is the sort of sun at the centre of the system, the hub that holds the wheel together, that creates order and harmony, the king. traditionally, you know, a king, an archetypal king, creates order and harmony in the realm, brings together the different conflicting forces and creates a harmonious kingdom. And like the mandala and like the solar system, we need something beyond ourselves, something really worthy at the centre of things if we are going to experience harmony. Just as the mandala needs the sun Buddha at the centre to give it light, and just as the solar system needs the sun at its centre to maintain order and harmony, we need a source of order and light at the centre of our mandala, our world, our lives, our minds. We need something at the centre to give harmony and meaning and light to our lives. We all need this, and everybody tries to find it, to find something to be at the centre of the mandala, something around which our life revolves, something at the centre we keep at the centre of our mind. So some people put career at the centre, some people put family at the centre, some people put money and possessions at the centre, some people put pleasure at the centre. And I really want to stress that there's nothing wrong with any of those things. There is absolutely nothing wrong with any of those things. There is nothing wrong with having a useful career and the self-development and the stretching that needs to happen to make that work. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with making the sacrifices needed to bring up a family. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with having money and possessions, and certainly we all need some money and possessions. We need a livelihood, and we all need some pleasure in our lives. There's nothing wrong with any of those things. Any of those things can be a really positive part of our mandala, but none of them works as the centre. None of them works as the centre. None of them can really work as the source of meaning and harmony and light. Careers end. Families move away. Money can be lost, and anyway, we all know it doesn't make you happy. Pleasure can't be there all the time. We're all going to have pain and discomfort as well. And if we try to get just pleasure all the time, if we try to make that our ruling principle, we'll become weak and addictive. So any of those things can be positive, but they all need to be illuminated by the light of something bigger, higher, more worthy, at the centre of things, something at the centre of things. And what we need at the centre of things, like Vadanya, is the Buddha. But I mean the Buddha in the very highest sense, the broadest, most general sense. Even people who've never heard of the Buddha could have the Buddha in the most general sense at the centre of their mandala. So what I mean by that, by the Buddha, I mean the sense of ourselves as spiritual beings, seeking to live a decent ethical life based on values, and based on something larger and more timeless than our own wants and fears and desires. I mean some sound, timeless principles by which to live. In other words, the Dharma. I mean a sense of our potential, what we could be, and a sense of trying to live up to that, to be what's highest in us. And I mean some sort of commitment to being part of a spiritual community that helps us to live up to what's highest in ourselves and to make the world a better place. So we all need some version of that. We need something that's bigger than just our wants and our needs and those things that are always going to run out of steam at the centre of the mandala. So it's a bit about the Buddha mandala, the mandala of the five Buddhas, and I'd just like to leave you, as it were, with two questions, one of which we could discuss. The first question is, what do I put at the centre of my mandala? What's at the centre of my mandala? What's at the centre of my life? What do I sort of make my decisions based on? And does my life and the way I spend my time actually reflect what I'd like to be the centre of my mandala? Or have I got into habits of living in a way that doesn't really do justice to the way I want to live? And secondly, a question that I'd invite us to actually talk about in smaller groups is, do I resonate with any of the four figures around the edge of the mandala? Do any of those, when I heard about one of those figures, did I particularly think, that one might be the aspect of the Buddha that I need to sort of go for. Do I think I need the Buddha of the slightly irritable, or the Buddha of the gifted? Or the Buddha who transforms rather sticky, unhealthy desire into warm love, loving things for themselves but without wanting anything back? Or do I need to transform a slight sense of fearfulness or envy, not being able to do things, into the wisdom of unstoppable action, the wisdom of the all-encompassing wisdom, the fearless wisdom of a Motor City? Do any of those colours, your favourite colour might say something. The way you relate to elephants might say something. Which is likely to be your patron Buddha at this very moment? Okay, it might change. So I'd like to leave you with those questions. So now let's split up into some smaller groups and perhaps have the opportunity to ask questions, but also to kick those around. So what I'd suggest is that those of us who have recently finished the 12-week course, if you would like to come with Satyajyoti and myself, and we will go into the green room, which is the room at the very front of the building. Walking towards the front door, it's on your right, and it's the room with the sofas in. And if the remaining guys would like to go into the like to stay here, and if the remaining women would like to go initially into the bookshop, and we're not going to have a mixed group this evening apart from the sort of more introductory group, because we just simply haven't got enough rooms, especially as one of them is full of stuff for the summer fair. So there'll be a couple of groups for men up here, and probably a couple of groups for women downstairs. So let's split up into some smaller groups and kick those topics around.